Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN. We're a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Professor Cass Sunstein and Professor Ayelet Fishbach. Thanks for joining us. Our YouTube channel has an archive of over 300 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to that channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for some introductions. Cass Sunstein is the Robert Walmsley University Professor at Harvard Law School. He is the founder and director of the program on behavioral economics and public policy at Harvard Law School, and he's the author of hundreds of articles and dozens of books, including the international bestseller Nudge, Improving Decisions About Health, Wealth, and Happiness, co-authored with Richard Thaler. Professor Sunstein taught at the University of Chicago Law School from 1981 to 2008 before joining the Obama administration in various roles. I'd like to give that local Chicago color in there. Ayelet Fishbach is the Jeffrey Breckenridge Keller Professor of Behavioral Science and Marketing at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business and the author of the award-winning book, Get It Done, Surprising Lessons from the Science of Motivation. FAN had the pleasure of hosting Professor Fishbach for a great event in 2022 for Get It Done. She's an expert in motivation and decision-making and is the past president of the Society for the Science of Motivation and the International Social Cognition Network. And now let's welcome Cass Sunstein and Ayelet Fishbach.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Lonnie, for organizing the event. And congratulations, Cass. This is amazing. This is publication day. How does it feel?
It feels exciting and terrifying and fantastic and horrible. All of those.
Well, I'm sure that it's going to be an amazing experience, that this book is going to be a success. I had the pleasure, because we are meeting today, to have an early copy, and I just loved it. So, wow. Okay. I have to start by asking, like, why? Like, I think about you as a legal scholar. You wrote about nudges. You wrote about teams. And here is a book that feels so personal and so psychological. And today I saw you had an op-ed about Taylor Swift. So you are really expanding your horizons with this.
Well, thank you for that. Thanks for the nice words. I've worked with my co-author on this, Tali Sharot, on a number of projects which are at the intersection of public policy and psychology, neuroscience, and economics. And we discussed a couple of years ago the fact that the question of habituation, a long word, we'll get into it in some detail, is maybe the most fundamental of all, I think, in the social sciences, also the natural sciences. So diminishing sensitivity to stimuli. So if you go into hot water at first, oh my gosh, it's hot, it's terrible. And then after a little while in, the water's just fine and great. And why did I think it was hot? And that's kind of a metaphor for how many things in life are. And we thought that there's really no book about this, about the most fundamental thing of all. And as we'll discuss, it bears on friendship, it bears on work, it bears on romance, it bears on legal topics also. So someone gets hurt, they sue for money, maybe their leg is damaged. It might be that the damage to their leg is something they really get used to and they don't mind much. Or it might be that they have headaches because of something that happened. It's not easy to get used to headaches. And juries might think a damaged leg's a lot worse than a headache. I've had headaches, and they might get it quite wrong. So habituation is a continent not visited enough, and it's full of surprises. Some of them are really funny.
So I was about to ask you if habituation is good or bad, but let me first ask you, what is habituation?
Okay, so if you go on vacation to someplace really nice, and I wish that for you, even though we've just met, I'm a fan of your work. The first day of the vacation is probably going to be astounding if it's the right place. And the second day is going to be comfortable and astounding because you're used to it. So 43 hours in, it's going to be peak. After that, I'm sorry to say, your vacation is going to get a little less amazing and oh my gosh, it's going to be more like terrific. That's because we habituate to really good experiences so that if you have a really good experience for a while, it stays really good, but your sensitivity to its amazingness starts to drop off. This is true for fantastic things, like if your partner is someone incredible, for many people, the incredibleness of the partner is maintained as a kind of background fact, but maybe the person is incredibly great rather than incredibly great after a while. If you stare at an object that has lots of colors around it, this is on the spine of the book, and there's a cross, not a religious cross, just a cross in the middle, and you're looking at the cross the whole time, the colors turn gray. If you don't change how you're looking, if you're just staring straight ahead. And that's because everything turns gray if we keep staring at it. That's habituation, diminished sensitivity to things that don't change.
And so you put together the experience of habituation to events with a physiological reaction, which is we don't see and hear things when we get used to them under the same roof. And in your answer, you kind of suggested that because of habituation, I'm going to enjoy my vacation less, but then bad things are not going to bother me. So it sounds like there is a mixed bag here, right?
Yeah, so I love what you said about seeing and hearing. So for everyone who's listening to this, we're talking. I hope you're listening to us. Thank you for that. But there's also very possibly some noise in the background that you're habituated to. It might be a heater, it might be an air conditioner. It's like you go into a room that has an odor, maybe someone's smoking, maybe there's a beloved dog who has done something a little smelly, and you initially notice it as my gosh, smelly room. But after 20 minutes or 30 minutes, you don't notice it at all. That's habituation. On the good and the bad, if we habituate to something that's amazing, then we experience like a little death every day because we don't notice something that's amazing around us. And probably, indulge me for a moment if you would, the actor Julia Roberts is a hero of our book. And that's because while reading it, I came across an interview with Julia Roberts in which she was asked, "What's the perfect day for you?" And she said, I wake up, I make breakfast for my kids, I get them ready for school, then I take them to school, then I start thinking about lunch with my husband, I have lunch, then it's time to start thinking about picking up my kids after sports. And she stops herself, she's self-conscious about the mundaneness of what she's described. She said, "It's boring." But because of my job, I'm an actor, I go away for weeks and then I come back and it's surrounded by pixie dust. It resparkles. So I think that's extremely beautiful that she's alert to the fact that doing the routine things of her day, if she did them without any, change or difference, it would be colorless. It would be good. She likes her kids. She likes her husband. She likes her life, but it wouldn't be amazing. But for those of us who have, a nice house to live and maybe friends or family and people we get to have lunch with, that's amazing. It might turn routinized. A key to life, I think, is signaled by Julia Roberts, which is to allow things that have become gray to resparkle. And that's extremely doable. Many of us have observed it's being done. Though, as you say, and we can get into this in more detail if you like, things that are kind of awful, like a number of years ago, I'm going to keep this vague, no, so as not to be mean to anyone. A number of years ago, I had a boss who was very, very harsh. He was very tough to work for. And the first days I thought, what is that? He's mean. He's unkind. He's a little savage. And then after a while, I, like hundreds of other people, kind of got used to him. This is how he was. We diminished in our sensitivity to his, let's say, impatience, etc. It might have been good if someone had not habituated and said to him, I don't think he meant to be like this. Someone had said to him, give people a break. They're trying to do their best. And that's kind of a metaphor for how we can habituate to any number of not ideal things. Crime, we can say something about crime if you want. the absence of good health care, misinformation, things that maybe would be good not to habituate to, we get used to.
Yeah, so you mentioned that the word resparkle. I'm not sure that's a real word. It's possible that you invented it for the book, but it definitely captured my imagination, how to resparkle things. And can I resparkle my life just by saying that I want to? Can I enjoy making breakfast for my son tomorrow just because we had this conversation, and I will want to appreciate the fact that I have this beautiful boy at home?
I have a prediction. You can tell me tomorrow if it's true, which is your experience with your boy is going to be a little brighter and more color filled because of our conversation. So I can say that I have a boy who's at a boarding school, but I get to see him a lot every week. He's 14. And every time I see him, partly because of the book, there's a smile that goes into my soul. And it's a kind of a resparkle smile. So, okay, here's something that I think everyone will find familiar. If you ever had a nightmare where someone you love is gone, it might be you think of someone who's, left you, or someone who's died, or someone who just isn't there, or maybe you've lost your job or something. These are anxiety dreams. And when people wake up, see if this resonates generally, happens for me, you wake up and you feel the amazing good fortune that the bad thing didn't happen, that you had a nightmare about. And then you wake up and you see, let's say, your home or your kid or your parent or your best friend, and you see them and they're cherished in a way that they weren't if you hadn't had that nightmare. And there are ways we can do that. Gratitude exercises, which I confess I find a little, what's the right word? A little excessively sentimental. This is just personal, a little excessively sentimental and a little mechanical. I love them better than I did. And the reason is what a gratitude exercise does is it dishabituates us. If you say, here are 3 things I'm grateful for, those 3 things are no longer gray, they have some color. And so they're mental exercises you can do that aren't sentimental or routine. They might just come on you like a flood of resparkleness. Now I've coined a really terrible word. Resparkling might be a word. Resparkleness had better not be a word, though so please let my coinage of the word not go beyond me. But that resparkling can flood, if you think about it in the best way, or people can do things that can make for resparkling, like they can change their environment, change their routine, go somewhere and then come back. One can do a little version of what Julia Roberts has to do because she's an actor.
Yeah, so it sounds like we can change the framing of the situation. We can engage in these mental exercises that lead us to see things in a different way. But you briefly mentioned by the end, you can actually live a life that has more sparkles in it. And I think that you mentioned life that has more experiences. How does that work?
Okay, so this is work which I bet you know well. There was a lot of work and continues to be on happiness, understood as subjective well-being, understood as either you ask people, how satisfied are you with your life? How happy are you with your life? Last I checked, Americans on a scale of 0 to 10 were on average at 7.4. That's pretty good. Or you can measure people's experience by asking them at the end of the day, between 9 and 10, what were you doing? How happy were you on a 0 to 10 scale? Or you can make it more specific. How calm were you? How anxious were you? And you can get measures of people's happiness. Okay, it occurred to many people who worked on this that doesn't measure everything, that people can be super happy, but they might have a life that doesn't have a ton of meaning. Or they might not be that happy, but their life might be extremely meaningful. So here's a story for you. When I was working in the White House, I asked someone I happened to pass in the White House, how are things? And he said, well, in terms of happiness, terrible. In terms of life satisfaction, really great. And I thought, that's not, I just want to know how he was. I didn't want a disquisition, but he was saying his life was full of meaning. He got to work for the American people, and he felt, profoundly gratified and grateful for that. But he wasn't liking his days. He wasn't smiling a lot. So people care about meaning, a sense of purpose, as well as happiness. But that's not all. There's more recent work which suggests that people care about psychological richness. That is, they want their life to have variety in it. So you might have a life that's really happy and really meaningful, but it's just the same thing day after day. Happy, meaningful, same thing day after day. People want variety, and they'll sacrifice happiness and meaning. I don't know if you find this very cool. I find this very cool. People will sacrifice meaning and happiness for the sake of psychological variety. They want to do different things. Maybe go to some place they've never gone. Maybe take up a hobby that's new and challenging. Maybe do some period at work that's different from what they've been doing, and then they'll come back to what they've been doing. And what's, I think, fantastic about people's desire for psychological richness is that psychological richness, you're not going to habituate to that. By definition, you're doing a new thing. It's resparkling. Meaning can be something to which you habituate. You're helping people day after day after day. Now, bless you for that. But if you're doing it, let's say you're a nurse or something, or someone doing good works, after a while, it might just see a little bit, you couldn't be more grateful you got to do it, but you think it's kind of the same old. And happiness, if you're watching the same fantastic science fiction shows, I like science fiction shows, night after night, it's kind of the same. And you want to do something that doesn't involve watching your favorite kind of shows.
Yeah, let me add to this, because you mentioned psychologically rich and varied and life satisfaction. For me, as a motivation researcher, is having goals, having something that you have not achieved yet. And it's kind of interesting that people always have goals that are hard to achieve. Okay? That you're happy when something that was really difficult, you were able to do it. Okay, you master this. Part of the reason is because this thing may have been important for you, but the other part is just the sense of accomplishment from getting to the summit, okay, from finishing a research project, from getting to publication date of your amazing book. And so goals, I think, are very critical for the equation here, for the lack of habituation. But let me move to the negative events, because this is where I feel things become more nuanced and maybe interesting in that way. Positive things we don't want to habituate. Okay? Negative things, well, I wish I didn't feel this pain anymore, but then on the other hand, if I didn't feel that pain anymore, maybe I wouldn't do anything about it. So is there a way you can explain your view about habituation to the negative?
Yes. So let's make a distinction. I am habituated to the following. I can't fly. I don't have wings. And I don't think in the morning, that's so terrible. I wish I had wings. I can't play professional basketball. I'm kind of tall, but not tall enough, and certainly not athletic enough. Can't do that. That doesn't give me any distress that I can't play professional basketball. I couldn't do, and we all have things like this. I can't do math really at a very high level, and this is not a therapy session, doctor, but it doesn't really bug me that I can't.
Can I just say that I'm sure you could if you wanted to, but you can continue.
That. I couldn't fly even if I wanted to, and I couldn't make the Olympic basketball team even if I wanted to. So to habituate to things that are kind of built into the structure of your life is a blessing, rather than knocking your head against the wall or cursing fate. And Tocqueville, the great social theorist, said, I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but he's talking about exactly what we're talking about. And he said, shall I call it a blessing of God or the last malediction of his anger? And then he referred basically to people's adaptation to things that aren't so good. But now let's talk about things that aren't so good. Suppose people have adapted to injustice or deprivation or poor health or a lack of safety. So the fact that their world, let's say, has danger in it is something to which they've habituated, such that they don't think there's anything wrong with it. May I tell you a story? I served on a jury, improbably, as a law professor. They let me serve on a jury. And I was on the jury, and it was about someone who was accused of punching a police officer. And during the deliberations of the jury, there were 12 of us, as you might expect. One of the 12 said, you know, the defendant, he was dumb. He said, at night, you never go out at night. There are only two things that can happen. One is you'll get arrested, and the other is you'll get beaten up. And the other 10 people on the jury nodded. Yes, they agreed. You never go out at night. And they weren't lamenting it. They were just taking it as that's the world. Now, for me, the idea that you never go out at night, that's an extremely surprising thought. Of course you can go out at night. How likely is that the police are going to arrest you if you go out at night? Low. How likely is it that you're going to be punched if you go out at night? Low. But for the people in the jury room who became my friends, I spent a lot of time with them, it just wasn't like that. But they weren't mourning it. They were habituated to it. Now, a world in which you can't go out at night because the police are going to arrest you or some criminal is going to hit you or steal from you, that's something you should rebel against and not take as a background fact. So if you think about a world with, I don't know, take your pick, dirty air, injustice of one or another kind, cruelty or unkindness, and people are saying, well, I'm habituated to that. The water happens to be hot in that way. That's not so great. So we have a lot of blessings in our lives that come from, let's call them dishabituation entrepreneurs. That is, people who haven't habituated and haven't said, you can't go out at night because the police will go after you, and said, hey, police officers, don't go after people just because they're out at night. Go after them only if they are engaged in criminal activity.
Yeah, this reminds me of some studies that we ran in which we told people about problems that are prevalent. We tell them about poverty, and we tell them about sickness, and we tell them about lack of clean water. And when you tell people that this is common, they say, oh, so these people are probably used to it. So you don't have to really take care of the problem because this is how they lived their life. This is fine. And this is the kind of negative habituation, I guess, that we want to get people not to experience.
Yeah. So the people in your studies, they were smart. They were right that people do habituate to these things. But the fact that they've habituated to these things doesn't mean that we shouldn't change them. If people are subject to dirty air, and I was in China not long ago. I mean, not recently, but not terribly long ago. And the air was super dirty. And I just noticed it as super dirty. And I was startled to see that people lived in Beijing didn't seem to notice how dirty the air was. They were used to it. So just as you say, but the fact that they were used to it didn't mean that they weren't getting sick as a result. It was still unhealthy air.
So it's slightly, I guess, more positive topic, but only slightly, okay? For those of us who are at about the age where we are prone to a midlife crisis, very much relevant for myself. You say that we are in particular at a tough spot in terms of habituation. Help me here.
Okay, so this is a hypothesis which is consistent with the data, but remains to be rigorously tested. It turns out that in many places of the world, people in their 40s and 50s and 60s have a midlife crisis. That means they have a diminution in positive affect and life seems stale and dull for them. Okay, and then the question is what's going on there? Here's wisdom from an old television show, which is called The Twilight Zone, where there was a character, a criminal, bear with me for a moment, who is shot. He's a petty criminal. He wakes up and there's an angel next to him named Pip. And he says, I have an angel next to me? I wasn't a very good person. And Pip says, well, what would you like? What would you like? Well, and he says, well, I'd like to be very rich. And Pip says, okay, very rich. And then he says, what else would you like? And he said, I want a lot of women to fall in love with me. So that happens. And he says, I want to go gambling and I want to win in gambling. And I want to have a great apartment. And then he gets everything he wants. And after a few weeks of this, he, our hero, the criminal who's not very likable, is very miserable that he's getting everything he wants. And he says to his angel, he says, I can't stand it anymore. You've got to get me out of here. I want to go to the other place. And Pip says, Mr. Valentine, that's his name, this is the other place. That's chilling, yes? Now, for a midlife crisis, for someone who, let's say, is 52 years old and life is good and you have everything you want, everything basically is solid and steady and it's really gray and colorless and it's lifeless and it's depressing and you're in crisis, not because anything's bad, but because nothing is making you want to get up in the morning. That's our hypothesis about the phenomenon. If you're 20 or 30, you could have a completely new job or interest. You could fall in love tomorrow. Someone could break your heart tonight. And that's a world of red and green and blue and black, everything. But for a certain number of people who are steady, it's like Mr. Valentine. It's the other place.
Yes, we know that to really enjoy food, you need to be hungry. And we know that many people in the Western world are never hungry throughout the day. And I think that this is a related phenomenon, right? That you can never quite enjoy your meal if you don't let yourself be hungry.
That's completely great. I confess that I don't particularly love meals. I like the company at meals, but meals I don't particularly love. I really love going to sleep. And that would be because I'm blessed to have plenty of food and not so lucky with sleep.
Yeah, well, you're not getting much sleep anytime soon, I'm afraid. This is going to be a busy, yeah.
Enjoying this immensely, so let's go for hours.
Yeah. Let me ask you about social media, how this relates to habituation. One of the studies that after reading your book, I found myself telling many people is the Elcott's study who paid Facebook users to quit Facebook. I love this study. If you could just tell us what the study found and why social media is something to look at when we think about habituation.
Okay, so people were asked, how much would you have to be paid to be off Facebook for a month? And a number of people said roughly $100. Pay me $100, I'll get off. Half of the people who said, pay me $100 were actually paid the $100. So the experimenters had a lot of money. They paid the people and they were off for a month. Half of the people were not paid the $100, so they were continuing on Facebook for the month. What Alcott and his collaborators did was to measure everything about people's experience in that month pretty regularly. So they'd ask the people who were off, no Facebook. How's the day going? How happy are you? How satisfied with your life are you? Are you anxious? Are you depressed? And then they would ask the people who were on Facebook exactly the same question. So they had a sizable population that stayed on, a sizable population that stayed off. It was fully randomized, so you could see what happened to the people who were off. The people who were off were happier. They were more satisfied with their lives. They were less depressed. They were less anxious. In fact, along every dimension that the experimenters could throw at their subjects, being off Facebook was a positive thing for people's life. So being off Facebook was a big uplift for people. Then Alcott and the experimenters asked the people who were off, how much would you have to be paid to be off another month? And here's the thing I think no one really understands, including the researchers. People said, okay, on average, they said $87. And what makes that a puzzling answer is why didn't they say, it was a great month, I'll pay you? Still, they demanded, I'm not amazing at math, but approximately 87% as much as they originally demanded. I can say a little bit about why.
Yeah, like why? So like you just had a great month. Okay, you are after this difficult withdrawal, you feel great. Why do you want to go back to the social media drug?
Okay, there are a couple possibilities. One is people just made a mistake so that they didn't adequately assess the nature of their experience in that month. It's not as if people went from, horrible lives to fantastic lives by being off Facebook. It was just a positive, and maybe people just missed that. Another possibility is, let's call it fear of missing out, that people did who stayed on Facebook have more political knowledge than people who were off Facebook. That's the one dimension along which being on Facebook was clearly better than being off. And it might be that being, bombarded-ish with political information, if you're on Facebook, makes you more anxious and more depressed. But still you want that, because you might think, I'd rather know what's going on in the way that Facebook enables me to do, even if it doesn't make my experience better. So people might have been making a call that it's better to be off than I thought. That's why $87 will do the trick now. I thought it was 100, but I still want to be on for the sake of learning. There might also be a fear of missing out quality, where people think, my friends are doing things, there are things I can learn about John, my classmate, and whether his kid is really more successful than my kid. I kind of want to know that, even though it's not happy making to do that. It's also possible that people, and this is your drug point, that people are addicted, and it's hard to get over an addiction.
Yes, and thinking about all the issues that you are raising, there is a lot about people's predictions in your writing and in your thinking. Okay, so there is what causes habituation and what people think will cause habituation, and how people anticipate they will feel in particular situations. And I must say that as experimental psychologist, I often have mixed feelings about studying people's predictions, because sometimes I think, well, of course, people cannot predict that. They are not trained to predict this. They're not psychologists. They're not social scientists. But you're looking at the kind of things that people ought to be able to predict, because they are going to design these experiences. Okay, they are going to put themselves in certain situations and avoid other situations, because they have a theory of how habituation works. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that I know is an overgeneralization, but are people generally right? Do they generally predict correctly their habituation?
Such a good question. And I have on my office door a statement from one of my heroes, Danny Kahneman, who was asked a bunch of questions and kept saying, I don't know. And the interviewer said, well, what do you think? And it said, it's not a matter of thinking, it's an empirical question, and I don't have the evidence. So I have on my door, I'm not sure if my students appreciate this, it's not a matter of thinking, it's an empirical question, I don't have the evidence. So, of course, to know whether people generally are right about habituation, would want to know, audience, please bear with me here. This is less fussy than it seems. We want to take a universe of predictions by a random sample of people and then see how many of them got it right. And we need to know that we had the right questions. So do people know that they'd habituate to the coldness of water where they're swimming? I say yes.
We talked about the Facebook study. I think, well, were you answering whether you think people can
Yes, I was saying that.
predict? Yeah.
So can I just have a programming note here, which is that whether there's a tornado warning or not is for you to decide, or whether we kind of put that in so that you'd be dishabituated in the context of this conversation. Up to you to decide whether we did that strategically or whether there's actually a tornado warning. But bracketing that, I say we don't have data on whether people are generally good at predicting their own habituation, and that it would be really context dependent. So let's suppose, I'll give a mildly autobiographical story, that one of you, one of the 100+ of you, find yourself having to move to a city for either work reasons or family reasons that you can't stand. Let's suppose it's a city that's extremely noisy and crowded, or suppose it's a city that's extremely quiet and uncrowded. You can't stand it. And then the question is, what do you think is going to happen to you over the course of months? I wouldn't be at all surprised if people make really terrible predictions that they think it's going to be so bad, this is going to be an awful 4-month period, when in fact they will habituate on average. And there's that. Now I'm building into a theory. As you'll see, it's a kind of rough and ready theory. If people are asked if they go swimming in the ocean in June, will the first 10 minutes or first 5 minutes be awful? Yes. Will it be great thereafter? Yes. So people predict that they will habituate to cold water. So here's the theory, that in some domains of life, habituation is extremely familiar. It's like something that we'll experience several times in a year, and we know it's going to happen again. Whereas you're having a bath, the first moment of the bath, hot, 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 and then you think, that's great. And it's not that it's gotten cooler, it's that you've habituated to the heat, and you're not surprised that you've habituated to the heat. But if you do something that's novel, which is either fantastic or terrible, the notion that you're going to find the fantastic only good and the terrible fine, that's really surprising.
One of the surprising stories in the book is about the day or the year that the Swedes decided to switch driving from the left side to the right side of the road. And if I remember correctly, they predicted that this is going to cause an increase in accidents, that this is going to be very hard for people. Can you remind me of that event?
So imagine that a mischievous governor in the state in which you're living, Illinois, decided, okay, in Illinois, we're going to be like England. We're all going to drive on the left side of the street from now on. And it's going to start at 3 p.m. on a cold March day. You would predict, I think, that it's going to be a crash-filled period, because how are people going to drive comfortably given that everything is backwards? Okay, and in Sweden, people were worried about that. They made the switch, but it turned out that the switch significantly diminished crashes rather than increasing them. It was a public safety initiative, though it wasn't so intended. And that's a mystery. Why was it that introducing this seemingly hazardous innovation turned out to produce a diminution in crashes? And the reason is, if you're a driver, even if you're a good driver, If you haven't crashed lately, and I hope that's true for everyone, then the notion of being on, real guard when you're driving seems a little pathetic and excessive. So you're careful, but you're not on immense alert. Once the Swedish switch was made, and there's a long word associated with it, you really have to buy the book to see what the word is. There's no other place. The internet doesn't have the only place where the accurate word, and it's a word which is so musical. Getting the book to hear the music of that word is worthwhile. Okay, I'm being ridiculous here, but the reason the Swedish switch worked was not for the intended purpose of diminishing accidents, but actually had that effect, was that people were on the alert. It's like the first time you are jumping off a diving board, let's say, in a place that's unfamiliar and it looks a little hazardous, you're going to be super careful. If you've dived off that same diving board, and let's suppose it is a little hazardous 10 times, the 11th, you're not really thinking about hazard anymore. And it may be that you should. The switch made people dishabituated to the risks associated with driving, big time. I can say my wife grew up in Ireland, and we go to Ireland a lot, and they drive on the other side of the road. I am so careful driving because I'm not habituated anymore. And in Sweden, it was an accident reducer, a significant accident reducer.
Yeah, it's such a surprising fact that for me really illustrated the power of dishabituation, okay, of what happens when you start paying attention to something as automatic as driving. So I found it fascinating, and I do need to buy the audiobook so I can listen to how to pronounce this very long word, because I could not read it when I just looked at the letters.
A lot of people, what you just said, a lot of people are saying. The people who've gotten the book today are saying, I'd say, I can't tell you how many people are saying, I need to get the audiobook also, so I can hear that word.
Yeah. So another reason to read the book is to find out the quote that you chose to put at the beginning to, I believe it was chapter 7. It made me gasp. It's about habituation to dishonesty and evil. And I'm not going to tell our audience what is this quote, but I'm going to ask you how habituation explains the really evil stuff.
Let's start, shall we, with experimental evidence. So Tali Sharot, my co-author on the book, did an experiment on lying, where she got a bunch of people into a lab, told that this is an experiment about cooperation, and if you cooperate with a partner who will be a stranger, you can make some money. Said, okay, sounds good. Then a number of them were told, actually, you can make more money if you lie to your partner. If you lie to your partner, you'll do better economically. And she monitored brain activity during the experiment, and people did lie to make more money. Their amygdala at the beginning, a part of the brain associated with emotion, often intense emotion, was on fire. I'm a lawyer, not a neuroscientist, so on fire is not the technical term. It was activated when they were lying. And that activation of the amygdala diminished over time, so that by the end of the day, people were lying, and their amygdala, instead of putting up a bright blaring red light, was basically saying, okay, we lie. That's haunting, I think, that people's lying becomes desensitized over time. I think some morally very questionable behavior on the part of, people in business and people in government, it can be explained in part that people are habituated to their own misbehavior. There isn't a red light. That's one example, and we're going to get grim in a moment. Second example is also experimental. Some old experiments by someone named Milgram trying to understand how authoritarianism and fascism came about in the 30s. And he showed that people would obey an authority figure, even if it meant that they were shocking, literally shocking, a stranger, administering electric shocks. They do that if an authority figure told them to. The authority figure wasn't ordering them to. It was just saying, you should do this. And the person was screaming in pain, and the people would do it. Now, we think that Milgram's experiments were habituation experiments, though Milgram didn't describe them that way. The reason we think that is that the shocking of the Confederate went in slow incremental steps. It wasn't like you went from nothing to ouch, ouch, ouch. It was like you went from something to a little shock, to a bigger shock, to a bigger shock. And it was in 32 stages, as I remember, that it went really severe. So that was about habituation to hurting other people. Okay, now let's talk about Germany, shall we? There's an amazing book, and this is not about Germany generally. This is about Nazi Germany. There's an amazing work, and this is one of a number of works that come to the same conclusion about the rise of horror in Germany. And Hitler wasn't, the Hitler we know within a month of his becoming chancellor. It started out bad, but not by killing people. It was more, threatening, discrediting, stigmatizing. This is about Jews and others also, but let's stick with Jews for a moment. Got worse and worse and worse over time. And people who lived through it, these are regular Germans, said, it all happens step by step. It was incremental. Said it was like a field growing up around you. And after a while, it was over your head. And that's maybe an adequate description, an adequate partial description of the rise of political horror in many times and places. And some things, this is a social science conversation rather than a political conversation, but many places in Europe and North America bracket what specifically falls in this category, and just let's go with it. There are things that are incrementally, step by step, getting, let's say, less good than they were 20 years ago. And that's something for which dishabituation is a really good idea.
Yeah. Well, we only have a few more minutes, so let me see. That one question that I definitely want to ask you is about working with Tali. How was it?
Oh, Tali, fantastic. So thank you for asking. And I didn't habituate to working with this amazing co-author. So if I may say, Tali has two characteristics which are off the charts amazing. One is she is either maybe the nicest person in the world or someone who is so psychologically acute that she just knows how to interact with other people. So in a co-authorship, and I hope you've had this also, the experiences are so fantastic and great. But to have someone who never makes you feel bad and always makes you smile or laugh, that's Tali is like that. The other thing is she's an off the charts writer. So her prose is just phenomenal. And my own experience is that sometimes people who write technical papers, including yours truly, struggle to write for a general audience, non-technical papers. And she can go from a technical paper at 11 a.m. to something that's really a fun story at noon. And that's just great. So instead of having to try to edit her writing to make it more fun and accessible, I would marvel at her writing and say, I'm going to try to be like that when I grow up.
Yeah, as a reader, I was very much aware of this great chemistry between you two because you kind of alternate stories and like that. This is like Tali's story, this is Kasu's story. It almost feels like I'm in a room with both of you and I'm hearing your conversation, which was a lot of fun for me. My my very last question, I believe, is about a very personal story that you get to toward, I believe, the end of the book, which is about your injury, and this is one of the points that I was thinking, hey, but this is the law scholar that writes about public policy, and this feels so personal, and so maybe tell us about how weaving this very difficult personal experience into a book that's supposed to inform policymakers.
We kind of went there. So in the book, so about less than a mile from where I'm speaking from right now, maybe half a mile approximately from where I'm speaking right now, a kilometer, to those of you who speak kilometer, I was walking home in the dark like it is now, and it was a snowy night, and I decided, as human beings sometimes do, to cross the street. And the next I knew, I woke up and I was attached to all sorts of machines. And I remember this very vividly. I thought there are two possibilities. One is I'm in the hospital and I'm in real trouble. The other is that I'm having one of those dreams that one is in the hospital in real trouble. I thought the probability is I'm having one of those dreams because I'd never been in the hospital in real trouble. So I went to sleep happily thinking I was having a dream. Then I woke up again and I was in the hospital attached to all sorts of things. So I got hit by a car, which was going 30 or 40 miles an hour, probably closer to 40. I should have been killed. I wasn't, but I had a lot of broken stuff all over. I'm happy to say everything is okay now, but the broken stuff hurt. And my brain was, I think the technical term is bleeding. Maybe that's what inspired my desire to work with a neuroscientist. I had a bleeding brain, and I had a very severe concussion, like really severe concussion. And when I woke up, the doctor said, "Can you wiggle your toes?" That's the first words I heard from a human being. And I was asleep for probably 15 hours. And I wriggled my toes, and then everyone in the room was celebrating as if it was July 4th. It was the best thing that ever happened. I thought, why is it so great that I wriggled my toes? Did something else happen in the world? But I guess they thought because I could wriggle my toes, I wasn't at the serious risk of paralysis, et cetera. And I got better basically in a matter of weeks. So that's the story. And I learned a lot. I wouldn't want to repeat the experience, I hasten to say, but I learned a lot about what one can and can't predict about something like that. And, about resilience, not that I'm particularly resilient, but, if you can't walk much, just really tiny, tiny steps, you walk the tiny, tiny steps and you don't curse, you say, okay, I'm at least mobile a little bit.
Yeah, it's a wonderful story, and for me, it really brought everything together in terms of the way you approach life as a learning experience, and everything is about like having a psychologically rich life, and what can we learn from this? What kind of knowledge we can spread to others through this experience, which I hope you will never have again.
A good story, if I may, that's not in the book that I've never told publicly. So the phone rang when I was there, supine and smashed up, and the person who was on the other line, someone I knew a little bit, not maybe a little better than a little bit, but not intimately, said, "Hi, Cass, it's Joe Biden." He was former vice president. He said, "I heard you got crashed in an accident. Are you okay?" And his kind of kindness, whatever you think of as politically, his kindness, his personal kindness is unbelievable. And I remember telling him, he asked me, "How are you? Can you walk?" And I said, "No, I can't walk. And I certainly can't run." But then I said to him, I heard you said, if I can walk, I'll run. And I said to him, "Can you walk?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Then run." Now, I don't think that was the decisive thing, but that did happen.
Aw,
Yeah, that is a great story.
a great story. Ayelet, I want to thank you so much for a very prepared, very lively conversation with Cass. We really are grateful for your time. I know you're a very busy professor with a very full schedule. We appreciate you took the time to read the book and really pay close attention and offer. I thought it was also very interesting with your deep research into motivation. I thought you might have some interesting takes on some of what was in the book. Cass, it's been a pleasure getting to know you in just the last hour and a half that I've had some time with you. We'll hear about in after hours. I want to maybe we'll talk a little bit more about the next book coming up. We want to learn about being famous. So let's talk a little bit about that. Everyone, we will see you.